Welcome, everyone, to the Success Elevated podcast. As always, I'm your host, Hayden Lee, and I am joined this week by a returning guest and good friend of ours here at Spot On Solutions, Rod Cruce. You are the founder and chief growth officer over at Trifecta Growth Institute. Rod, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hey, Hayden. Thanks a lot for having me. Always a pleasure to be on the podcast and really appreciate the invitation.
Oh, it's awesome. The cool thing about doing follow-up podcasts or second podcasts with someone is we get to kind of dive in a little bit deeper into some of the topics that we maybe kind of hinted at originally, but this is an opportunity for us to, go deeper. And I love follow-up guests. We've had a handful of guests that have come on, multiple times, which ends up being super, super cool. So, Rod, I think first and foremost, obviously you introduce yourself to our audience and people are pretty familiar with who you are in the restoration and home services world, but I'd love for you to kind of maybe just briefly give us an intro of a little bit about who you are and what you guys are doing over at Trifecta, and then we can obviously dive into some of the things we want to talk about today. But if you don't mind, kind of start there with just a little bit about who you are.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks. Like you said, Rod Cruce, I'm the founder and chief growth officer for Trifecta Growth Institute. At Trifecta Growth Institute, we believe in growing businesses by growing people. And basically that's through training, leadership, and coaching, and that piece of it. We're located out of Denver, Colorado, but we work across the nation. We even have some clients overseas. So we have some restoration certification courses and some really good training courses that are both online, in person, and we can pretty much work anything around people's needs.
I love it. You come to that space with a background in it, like you used to own a restoration company, construction. You're still doing construction in a lot of ways, and so you have experience in it. But I think what maybe sets you apart even further is your background with regards to like leadership. And I don't want to speak for you in any way, but I think a lot of that probably comes from your time in the military, right? That a lot of some of those leadership skills that you've developed over the years and now implementing in training programs and stuff come from some of that background in the military.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things about, I was in special forces in the military, and, we believe in training a lot. You go through a lot of training just to get there, to be able to be, qualified. And we're always being developed, and within leadership and many other different skills. And so there's a value there. And, we have a growth mindset that was always instilled in us. And with that, we kind of take that same kind of structure that leadership development and bring it to the civilian sector. There's a lot of different things that, it's not military style leadership at all. Even then we didn't do military style leadership. We were always a little bit more out in the front of the tip of the spear, working with diplomats, strategic initiatives with different countries and stuff of that nature. So we have to be very savvy in, how we address, especially politicians in third world countries, and because you can go real quick, you can go south really quick if you're not taking in those cultural norms and also being respectful and being able to talk at a very strategic or operational level.
I love it. The majority of our podcasts and our conversations today are going to be about leadership and training leaders and stuff. And so before we kind of dive into some more specific details there, especially about what you're doing at Trifecta, the leadership piece in the military has always been fascinating to me. I have a really good friend of mine that's in naval special warfare, and he talks very fondly about his leaders there. Even leaders that during the training process sometimes had to yell at him and get after him a little bit. Right. But it's this fascinating culture to me that you can be a good leader, but also ask for excellence out of your team. Those two don't have to be opposed to each other. You know what I'm saying? That like he loves these leaders and believes in them and has confidence that they care about him and his well-being, but they're also going to get after him. And they also got after him during the training process and continue to get after him when he's, maybe made a mistake or something. Right. So it's this cool concept of you can want your team to be excellent and strive for excellence while also people care about you and respect you. I don't know if you can speak to that at all, or your thoughts on that.
I mean, everything, one of the biggest things that I always try to do as a leader, and I agree 100%. I had some very, very great leaders that I was fortunate enough to be underneath and follow. And, it was always, probably about three things I could always tie it to. Number one, it was all about culture. And
Yeah.
we had a winning mindset and a growth mindset culture. And so when you cultivate that thriving culture and then people buy into that, then the accountability is the second thing that comes in there. I'm not putting these in any kind of order, but there's accountability. And when you set the bar high and you don't have to be mean, but when you set that bar high and people buy into that, they want to do well. And so then it becomes that competitive environment, but also that accountability environment. So, and then one of the biggest things I've always seen from my leaders and that I've always tried to do is show that genuine concern for the individual. And that's both on a personal and a professional level. And when you can do that, and that individual realizes that you are really looking out for their best interest and also the best interest of the team, and it's not about you personally, and at that point.
Yeah.
And that's the way I always try to lead. I don't want it, it's not about me, it's about the team and it's about the environment. And if I can enable the team, whether that is through personal growth or professional growth, then the environment will take care of itself.
Yeah. I think that's that at the end of the day, that's what ends up being most important, right? Is this idea of being a part of a team, and the team's goals, the team's future is more important than the individual. And I think that's how, like, obviously that's how, you have successful like military teams and units and all of that. But I think it's how you build a successful business. Like the concept of the goals of the entire team, the whole business are more important than the goals of an individual. And that goes to like the leaders as well. Like your goal, the goal should be team growth, not just the CEO wants to have a few more bucks in their pocket, and like that. That's how it's got to be. That's how you got to have that correct mindset, I guess,
Right.
in order for everyone to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's very important. Every company I've owned, it's always been, or every company I've ever even been a part of, there's always been that strategic vision and there's always been the mission. And, a lot of times people make these missions, provide home services or something of that nature, which is fine. But in reality, whenever you want to give that mission statement out there, and as long as everybody buys into that, you don't want to, everybody's going to support that in their own right. And, at the end of the day, whenever you're successful and you can really tie that to a mission statement to what you're trying to do and to where you're being successful, the money's going to come if that's really what you're trying. Of course you got to be profitable in business. Otherwise you're not going to be in business very long. But there's also a way to balance the needs of the individual versus the needs of the company, how you generate the profit, and then also how you generate the culture and set that culture up to thrive. And if we don't do all this together, and if it becomes very transactional, then at that point we have an issue. And at least from my experience, I think that when it becomes transactional only, which I see a lot of companies that are that way, then at that point people start to leave or they don't get the buy-in. And then that becomes a leadership issue in all due respect.
Yeah. Well, yeah, transactional is a great way to just say, like, when you're so focused in on, did this employee or did this person make me money or make me more money? If that's what you are distilling your numbers down to, then yeah, you're going to have a poor culture. You're going to have leaders that are frustrated, or your leaders themselves are going to be causing the issues. Yeah. So I think the distilling it down to, like, are you so focused on the transactional piece that it starts impacting your culture is huge there.
And then, at the end of the day, it's about relationships and human connection.
Right.
And when you can make sure you have that, and you, like I said, you're showing that genuine concern, then the transactions will take care of themselves.
Yeah. I think, yeah, that's It seems counterintuitive probably to a lot of business owners, but it totally will. Like if you're more focused about culture and your training, right? Like we're going to be talking about, and your people, if you focus on those elements, like the business success and the revenue growth and the profits, all of those things will come. Like, but
Right.
that shouldn't be that can be something you have in the back of your mind. Like you mentioned earlier, like you can't not think about the money because you've got to be profitable in order to stay in business. But it can be something that can kind of be in the back of your mind. Whereas your real focus, your day-to-day optimizations and operations can be about how do we help our team grow? How do we help our culture improve? Those kinds of things. And I think that leads perfectly into kind of the first thing I wanted to kind of fully dive in, and not the first thing, because we've obviously been chatting here for a minute, but before we really dive into the leadership piece, which I think is at the core of this, every successful business has good leaders. I think the first step is you've got to build like some good training programs. And why do you think like this is something we've talked about on the podcast a bunch? Katie, as you're aware, is a big proponent of like having training systems and programs in place. Why does like a successful company need to have good training? And when I say good training, it's because there's probably people out there listening right now. They're like, oh, we have great training. Most of that training is like, go follow Bob around for a couple of days. It's not like a legit training program. So why do you think like good, successful companies should have training programs?
Well, first of all, I think a lot of people confuse onboarding with training. Uh,
Yeah.
Onboarding is a type of training, and it's meant, that's the kind of pieces where you get people to kind of do right seat rides and get people oriented to how the company culture is or how the company does business, or getting how the systems work in that aspect, or what's the normal procedures. And we need that. We definitely need that. And that's usually why when a person comes on, that's really sets the stage, and it gives a company the opportunity to wow the employee, right? And you kind of think about this, and it is counterintuitive to a lot of people in business, because you're like, hey, I just gave you a job, or I just hired you. So now they're ready for them to start work. But in reality of it is, it is still, we still are we're trying to establish that human connection and establish relationship at that point. So we need to try to wow the new employees.
Yeah.
And it needs to start with that, showing that genuine concern, that we're just not throwing them out there on the job site day one without anything else, or, without any kind of understanding. Once we do that, now then, to have a big training, a dedicated or formal training program or something like that, you have to make the decision. Am I going to do it in-house, or am I going to do it, use a third party? And, very few companies are able to do it in-house. Number one, it's very expensive to have a full-time trainer. And also you got to make sure they have the skill set to do it. And then the second piece of it is, now then you've got somebody else that's taken off from doing productivity to train. And so you have to kind of balance that and make that decision up front. But the reason to have one is really for skill development. You got to look at your skills. I mean, not everyone comes into the company with the right skills. And we're a big component of hiring for potential and development at that point. If you get the right, if you get the right culturally fit or the right person that fits the culture, that has the mindset you're looking for, and also has the ability to perform, well, now then that's a big part of the battle. From there, now then we can look at what skills are lacking, or need to be improved upon or built upon. And now then we can make a good assessment, and we can get that training available for that person. And that becomes a bigger deal than you think, because now then, are we only getting that training for one person, or we need it for the whole team? And so you can't take a shotgun approach to this thing. You really want to be more precise, and you also want to look at what kind of objectives you're trying to get in your company. The other thing is increased productivity. I think this helps with employee retention and also recruitment. If you have one of the things that we always had was project management training. And so when we brought in project managers, they would go through project management training, after 90 days. And it allowed us the time to assess them, and it also allowed them to assess us. And then at that point we would start their professional development. And the other thing I think it does, when you put that in too, it helps you identify future leaders. And those are some of the more important reasons why I think having a formal training program or some type of, dedicated program is beneficial to a company.
That's so cool. There's two things there. I think the first thing I'll ask real quickly. You mentioned because the second piece is how a training program can identify leaders, and I want to dive into that. But first, you mentioned that when you're looking to hire someone, you're hiring for potential. I'd love for you to elaborate on that a little bit. Is it like, are you thinking of, okay, what could this person become in 3 years or 5, or like what are you looking at when you say I want to hire someone based on their potential?
Yeah, so we have a different approach to I think, that looking how we hire. Everybody can put out a job requisite out there and they can put the task or the nice, we want these things, they have the must haves, then we have the nice to haves. But if you look at it from a hiring perspective, we look at it in 3 different ways. Number one, you've got the cognitive. And when I say cognitive, what we're really looking at is someone's experience, someone's resume. That's when we're going to put that. That's the first thing we're going to look at to see if they're going to, be able to do the job. And so when we look at the cognitive, that's usually a piece of paper that maybe somebody submitted, maybe a video if somebody was, nice enough to do that. But what we're looking at is, do they have some type of training or do they have some kind of formal, education? And then, what's their experience level? The second thing we like to look at is, and that's the first question we're trying to answer. Does this person have the experience or some type of experience that can be related to this job that would be a good fit? The second piece of it, we look at the effective. And the effective is kind of like your personality. A lot of people do Myers-Briggs or they'll do the, different DISC assessment, stuff like that. And those are great. And what that does, it tells you how that person's going to perform, and when it's nice, when there's no stress, whenever there's no any kind of stressors in there or adversity taking place. And so we do want to look at that, and that's really where we take it to the next level, which is the interview. And the question we're trying to ask then is this person the right fit for our culture? Do we feel like do we think their personality is going to get along? Can they communicate very well? And so we like to ask that second question. The third question we like to look at is the conative. And every time I talk about this, people are like, the conative. What is the conative? and it's not normally, known, but we have an assessment that we do, and it allows us to look at how people problem solve. How do they do work? And that is very important. And everybody has strengths they bring to the table. And when you can identify those strengths on the front end of what they're looking at, or what you're looking at and what you're going to get, because some people, we look at it, some people are fact finders and they'll do a lot of research. Other people are very general. They don't want to do the research. They just want the answer. And then when we start looking at, like, how do you, look at processes, who follows processes and who wants to circumvent processes? There's people, we can look at that and see where they're going to fall in. And so we can also tie that to where we can work with a company and figure out what their job is. And we can create a modus operandi, an MO for what person is going to best fit that job. And then we can give that assessment to the individuals. And then we can overlay it and we can say, okay, this individual is a really good fit. We give it a grade, they're an A, or this individual's an F. And, you shouldn't hire them, even though they may have the right cognitive on the resume and they may have a good personality, but ultimately they probably will not do well in their job. And so now you're setting yourself up for a much better experience on getting the right candidate into that. And the big benefit from that is you're not wasting 90 to 120 days to realize you hired the wrong person. And now then you're right back to square one again. When really at that point, we should start looking and have a good assessment of where we need to start to develop this individual, because we hired on potential. We also hired on the right mindset for that. So now then we can develop and get them at the point where they're performing really well.
So cool. Thank you for, I didn't want to I didn't want to throw too much of a curveball there, but your answer there was so good. Thank you. I think people get so caught up in, and I mean, we could spend a whole podcast, and we have spent podcasts talking about the hiring process, but
Yeah.
people get so caught up in hiring for a specific need right now, like,
Right.
oh, we need more technicians. I got to get a technician. We're so swamped. We're so busy. And what you're describing is you're looking much more deeply into who these individuals are, who these candidates are. Can we develop them? Are they going to be problem solvers? Can we help develop them into leaders? And yeah, it's so cool. And I love the concept of having that, you know, a more in-depth analysis of those
Yeah,
candidates.
and I want to be clear, when we start bringing in like the entry level and field personnel like that too, I do see the need for it where sometimes you have to hire somebody to be able to get into that position. And most of the time, if you think about it from a mitigation technician perspective, when we hire that, most people don't find one that's already WRT certified, molds, already got all these qualifications. If they did, they got them from another company or somebody that left. And that's great. But when we really start, if you think about your process there, a lot of times you're hiring somebody at the entry level, and we should don't, and there's an expectation at the entry level versus that when you get to the second and third level, when we start looking at mid-level managers, there's a different expectation there. And so you got to understand how you climb the ladder to being able to go from an entry level person to a 2-year person to a mid-level manager person to that point. And those skills that what you're looking for, or those potential, hiring on that potential is different. And so there is a need just to bring in some field personnel for sure. But when you start looking at, these $70,000-$80,000 year jobs, then you need to put a little bit more effort into that, I think.
Yeah. Well, and even hiring those technicians, that kind of the three things that you described, you look at still allow you can still hire technicians using that process, but it allows you to think, hey, yes, you're a technician today and you might be a technician for a couple of years, but I'm thinking down the road, who can you
Exactly.
become? And it's just a cool concept to think, I'm gonna hire somebody and begin their time with our company with a thought of, hey, they could eventually become this or elevate into this position, which is so cool.
The Success Elevated podcast is brought to you by SOS Navigator. SOS Navigator is an on-demand training platform geared towards marketing, personal development, and business growth. We understand that as a business owner in the service industry, you wear a million hats. Let SOS Navigator be a simple and cost-effective way for you to continue to grow your business. Click the link in the show notes below and use code SOS Podcast to get 10% off your next on-demand training course.
The other thing you mentioned, if we rewind just a couple of minutes, you mentioned that this training program, again, we've talked about hiring, you've gotten some good team members, you're developing this training program, or you're maybe reaching out to Rod to help you develop a training program. How does a training program help you both identify and elevate leaders? How does a training program do that? Do you have to do something different with it? What are you looking to try and accomplish with a training program to potentially, either identify or elevate leaders?
Yeah, that's a great question. Number one, you want to look at what is how do they go about the training? At that point, are they just, I use OSHA 10 a lot. Everybody wants to get OSHA 10. And OSHA 10 is 10 hours of training. It's all about safety and it needs to be there. But for the most part, people just try to click through it as fast as they can and get the certification and take the exam and they're done, right? Whenever you see someone actually taking the interest and putting the effort forward to their development, and then they're asking good questions, or they start to come back and they say, okay, hey, why don't we have first aid kits here or there? Now then you're starting to see, you're starting to get what I call a KPI, a key performance indicator for the training, because now then that individual is identified a problem or something they've seen that they've learned from that now is going to help your business. It's going to, help prevent that. Or all of a sudden they start to walk around and they say, hey, do you mind if I do do an assessment of our warehouse? And so those are ways right there that you can see where they start to apply what they just learned. and they start to apply it. So now then when you're looking at somebody who has a different level and is also trying to be a problem solver and also trying to show leadership. When you see that, then you want to take a mental note of that. You want to reward that behavior, but also you want to look and say, okay, now then what skill set do I need them to be like in 2 years to where maybe I bring them up to be a foreman or bring them up to be a project manager or project coordinator to something like that nature. So that's one piece there. The second portion of it, and I look at this from a leadership, it's also an accountability piece. I use project management all the time. I'd say if you're going to put in any training for your company, put in project management and put it across the board. Because I mean, a lot of people who's heard me speak or whatever, I say, if you think you're a restoration company, I think you're mistaken. You're really a project management company because everything you do is managing projects. And so everybody needs to understand project management, and that's what's going to get you a higher ROI on your jobs. But when you get people that training to where now then they understand a more definitive why you're doing certain things, now then they start to question each other as a team, and they want to make sure that the procedures are being followed and that we have the ability to do the right thing. And that creates also the ability to delegate. Okay. So those are some ROIs right there you don't see because, you only have so much time for a project manager. And the more you can start to learn how to delegate that, and people that have been trained and understand that process, now then you can also see that the leadership there. Do you have potential where they have a track now to grow?
Yeah. The coolest thing about that is, even again, just to distill it down to just something super simple is, I mean, you said you can identify leaders just based on how they go about the training, like just how they complete the training and how they problem solve and how they like that in and of itself is a simple way to do it. So even if you did nothing else but just set up the training program and let it run, you're going to be able to identify, hey, these people could potentially become, your foremans, your project managers, your mid-level manager, whatever, right? Like you can start to see those wheels turn in such a way that you're like, that, this person with enough training and enough time could turn into something else, which is so cool to see that happening. And again, it all comes back to having that foundation of the training program itself.
Well, then you start seeing initiative, you start seeing better judgment, tangible things I'm talking about right now. That's hard to measure than a tangible piece. But as you start to see more and more of those intangibles coming out, and that accountability, which is another intangible attribute, when you start seeing those things surface, and then you start seeing the productivity increase, you start seeing the bottom line go up. There's pride, there's that growth mindset, what we're talking about. It's really, really like a light bulb coming on when you see that and you're like, man, this is probably one of the best things we ever did.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned it a couple times there, and it's something that, I'm sure is on everybody's mind, is carving out the time in the day to either develop your own training program or work with, somebody like you to help build a training program. Is there an ROI that's worth it? Like, is it worth their time carving out this portion of their day, whether it's so many hours a week or however it works with you to do it? Is there a legitimate ROI that you can get from spending the time to develop your team, develop leaders? Can you help me understand that element, I guess, a little bit? Like, you've mentioned it multiple times. You've mentioned the intangible ROI, which is you get, just better leaders, right? But is it worth it for an owner to set something else? Obviously it is, but I guess how is it worth it? I guess is maybe a better question.
I'm gonna give you an example of when I bought my restoration company.
Yeah.
And what we did with a safety program even. Everybody was like, we don't have time for safety, but we would do these, tailgate talks, or maybe they saw we do these talks every day or every week. And so we put in a formal program. And when I bought it, there was there was about 7 accidents that had been on the books then for like about the last 18 months. And then we're not talking big accidents, but we're talking about some stitches, some cuts, some bruises, a trip, a fall,
Right.
a hurt foot. But all that goes into what it calculates into how much you pay in workers' comp. And so now then, so we put in the training program where we did it once a month, where we had a formal piece. We got everyone to start training. They had a simple subject, and we put that out, and then they had to prepare for it. Over the next 3 years, 4 years, we didn't have an accident one.
Yeah.
And so when we put the safety program, we got a 5% savings on the workman's comp. And I don't remember how much we're paying, how many tens of thousands of dollars we're paying for that piece of it. But anyway, so we got a 5% savings there. Let's just say it's not every company's gonna have $100,000, but let's say that's a $5,000 savings on a $100,000 bill, right? The next thing is our coefficient on what calculates that went down. And so we went from like a 1.19, a 1.19 or 1.22. So that's 22% over what you're paying because of the accidents. When you get back down to 1, you're paying your regular dollar amount. When you get under 1, you're paying less because you're a better, safer environment, right? So by putting in that training program, we went down from like a 1.19 or 1.22, whatever it was when I bought it. We got it all the way down to a 0.94 over about a 4-year period. So, calculate that up. Let's just say on $100,000, even then, if it's cost, instead of paying that 1.19, you're saving $19,000 there. And then when you get below it, you're saving even more money. That was just from a simple safety program. When we start to look at some of the key performance indicators, even within project management, or how much conflict we have within the workplace, how much time is lost when you don't have organization? How much time is lost when not everyone is on the same sheet of music? How much time is lost when people are continually having to look for stuff that should have been communicated? And so those hours can be correlated to dollars. And so when you start to see the productivity and the efficiency and the effectiveness start to take place, then you start to see the numbers tick up on each job. You start to see the waste go down.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how you look at what the training program is, and of how you start to quantify that through, return on investment or KPIs. And those KPIs should be telling you that it's working, and then the ROI will come. It's not going to be instantaneous after you do day one training, but you should see that within relatively few months.
Well, and yeah, I mean, and thank you for that answer, because I think it does sum it up super, super well. You start looking at all of the efficiency and effectiveness, and something as simple, or not simple, but something is just setting up a safety and training program can have long-term, real, like, dollar effects on your business. You're much more profitable because you saved X amount of dollars on that, on insurance and all of that. I think one thing that I've tried to apply here at Spot On Solutions, and just, my own day-to-day, working with my team, is every time I think I got to teach somebody to do something, I'm like, oh man, it'll take me longer to teach them to do it than it will just for me to do it myself. Right. But I've started kind of trying to flip my mindset a little bit, that like, hey, if I can develop some kind of document or training or way to teach maybe this individual how to do this thing once, then I can then reshare that with anybody else that needs to learn about that in the future. And it's kind of the same way with the training program. You sit down and develop this training program once. Yes, it's going to be time consuming. Yes, you're going to have to meet with Rod a lot to get it kind of ironed out or whatever. But once it's set in place, then it's not quite set it and forget it, but it's now, much more replicable for all of your other future hires, all of your other employees. You can let it run in a lot of ways on its own, without you having to spend the time to be like, okay, I've got so-and-so that's going to shadow me today, and then next week I've got to have another new employee shadow me. And you're spending all this time doing the same training over and over again. And having that program in place allows you to, again, it's not set it and forget it. I know that's not the right phrase for it, but in a lot of ways it is, because you build it once, and then it just repeats every time you hire somebody. So,
well, and building that program, or even building a training class, takes time, effort to do it right. And it also takes money. We're finished up our procurement essentials training course right now that we've put onto e-learning, and one that we can put together that can be, taken any time. It also supports some of our certification programs. And, to really get that down to a point, somebody who's going to do procurement, or even a project coordinator who's going to understand that, have never done that before, but is going to help somebody buy stuff on it. It's taken us about 6 weeks to transform that over into an e-learning piece of it, to the point where people can take it at their leisure. And how do you balance operations and training? Well, that's one of the things we're doing. We're putting a lot of this stuff to e-learning, but it's also tailored to the restoration world and construction world. But so they don't have to take it all at one time. But also, the amount of time it takes us to put that together and do it professionally and get it to where it actually nests very well and that builds upon each other. I mean, that's an art. Versus if we're just saying, okay, go buy this or go to Lowe's or do something like that, that's not necessarily procurement. That's more of a task. So when you think about how much time it goes into that, and you think about, well, am I going to do that? Or are we going to let somebody else do that for us? I mean, that's a lot of time to put that training together. And for a lot of the companies, especially not of the real big companies that don't have this, it doesn't make sense. It makes sense to outsource that, because then you have a professional program and a level that has been answered that you may not have even thought for. And your time is probably better spent somewhere doing something else. Onboarding, I think 100%, you need to have a dedicated onboarding program that allows them to go through certain things. And that's really to teach process, procedures, and kind of the culture and how we do things here, call it XYZ restoration way. But when we start really looking at, I'll put one out there. We're doing a company right now is conflict management, and they're a larger company, but they're going to have probably a couple hundred people that's going to ultimately go through this conflict management course. They could easily go in and try to talk about conflict and stuff, but our course is really detailed, it's laid out. And so we're taking the leaders and putting them through it, and we're facilitating that, but they're also an e-learning version. So now then we are helping facilitate their leader development and also facilitate them being able to show leadership by taking, whenever the other people go through, or the lower ranks go through our conflict management course through e-learning. Now they're going to be the ones who's going to help facilitate that and show their leadership. And now then the whole company is going to be trained in conflict management so that they have understand why it happens, when it happens, how to prevent it, how to be proactive, how to engage in healthy conflict. So there's a lot to that when you really put it in play. But how much time are we going to save by having everybody trained in that they're not going to be, they can recognize small arguments that should never be discussed, or they should just, or they should be addressed early on, so they don't, upscale into something even more bigger or worse.
Yeah. The whole concept behind it, I think, again, in my small view of it, I'm always thinking, oh man, it takes too much time. But how you're describing is it simplifies all of this. It really doesn't take that much time. And again, it makes it so much easier to develop your entire team because you have a program that's just set in place. You're not constantly, maybe you're not changing your training based on individual to individual. Like you have very consistent, structured training that makes sense for everybody. And you're training for the position, not necessarily, because I feel like training is so individualistic, and so many different companies are like, well, this person, I trained him this way, and this person, I trained him this way. And it's like, now you can have something that unifies your team. Hey, we were all trained the same way. We all know how to do everything. We can all fully develop and know how to do our role that much better.
Things you put in at the company level that everybody gets, and there's other things you go individual, right? So like we have 180 something training courses that we have in our learning center right now, and companies can get that for less than $200 a person per year, and they get access to over those videos. And then we teach them how to facilitate that using those. That alone right there helps you identify leaders. It helps them get some training in there. It allows you to take care of some of the common people skills that you need. And it's really inexpensive, but it also helps you develop your leaders. And it also allows you to identify those leaders, going back to that again, which is so crucial when you're trying to grow a company or trying to develop people to do what you're asking them to do. So you don't have to go back and just reiterate this to every individual, because that does take time. And so you want to be able to maximize your time as a one-to-many, but also have a good resource that you can use that's going to allow everyone to get on the same sheet of music.
Yeah. You mentioned 180 training courses. Most of the people that we both talk to end up being in the restoration world. A lot of the trade shows and conferences we go to are geared towards restoration. If I owned a restoration business, what are maybe your top 3 restoration courses that you would recommend, or the training courses that you recommend from your entire library? What would be the top 3 ones that you would recommend?
That's an easy and a hard question.
Because there's so many. You need all of them, right? Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, truthfully, I think number one for anybody in your company, I say conflict management.
Yeah. Especially if you're going to be talking to customers, like it's just something you've got to have. Yeah.
It is, because our conflict management, the way we looked at it, is both between employees or in-house.
True.
And also
internal and external. Yeah.
External customers, subcontractors, vendors, stakeholders, anybody there, insurance agents, all that. We've addressed all that piece of it. That's the one you need for your entire company, I would say. The second, I think that having a good soft skills, people skills training, which is what ours is it's like 4 to 15 minute micro videos. And we can put that in play pretty easily, but also it helps you get leaders on board to facilitate and show and demonstrate leadership and show that genuine concern for people's well-being and development. Those are 2 that at the company level you can put in for very, very inexpensive and quick. The third one I would say is project management training. And I say that because you're our project management company. I mean, everything you do is handling projects. And we have a lot of people that understand how to get projects from A to B and Z, but are they doing it the right way? Are they doing it the most efficient? Are they making the best money on it? Do you have a one-legged person in a butt kicking contest who doesn't have any help and not using their team because they don't have time to train them? Like you just said, here's what I need done, but I'll just do it myself. And so now then you have a trust issue, you have a delegation issue. So when you can get more people understanding what you do as a company, and that's your true value proposition and product you're delivering is project management, then you need to have everyone trained in on that. Especially at the mid-level manager level to the project coordinator, project admin, the office manager, and understand even at the foreman, I would say is great. If you can get it down to the lower levels, then that would be the next level. But I mean, the project management training is, I mean, I can vouch for that just from when I was on, when I bought my company. I mean, we went from being not profitable, but in project after project to being well over industry standards. And it was all because that even my receptionist was talking the right language and could talk to a customer without having to wait till the project manager came back in from the field to call the homeowner.
Yeah.
She was able to, so that's huge. And those would be the top 3 I would recommend, not necessarily in that order, but and we would help you do an assessment. If you need it, it's free. Just give us a call.
Well, and that leads perfectly in what I was going to ask you next is, anybody that's listening, restoration, construction, or whatever it might be, they own a home service business and they feel like they need some help in some of these areas. Obviously we'll kind of maybe send some links for them to contact you. We'll link your website and stuff, but it sounds like the first step then would be an assessment to kind of help them know where they need some help, maybe what are some blind spots they might have, some things that they could work on. And then you can start recommending, hey, we could build you a custom training program, or here are some courses that would help you. It sounds like that assessment's kind of the first step for them to figure out what needs to be done.
It is. And that's sort of just a quick one we do with you just to kind of see what you have right now. We do also offer, a facilitation workshop with companies where we come in and we help you define your entire training program strategy. That's not free, but it is something we work with companies to do. And then, we kind of go from there and we look at what makes common sense, what makes common sense. We don't try to sell you something or try to do something for you that doesn't make common sense. We want to make sure that we are going to get something that we can tangibly have tangible measurements on that show improvement. But it also needs to be addressing a need or a problem area. And that's how we get started.
I love it. Rod, this has been awesome. It's been a great conversation. I know our listeners are going to get some really cool value and insight out of this. I said, and we'll plan on putting some of these links in the description, but if people are curious and reaching out to you and want to maybe kind of chat a little bit about how they can develop some of these programs themselves, or obviously work with you on some of those assessments and training programs, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
I mean, in all reality, is to go to our website at trifectagrowthinstitute.com. You can go check out some of our stuff on there. There's also get a consult. You can go in there, you schedule a 30-minute consult with you. It's free of charge. That will allow you to put what you're looking for to get us started. And then you can pick a time to meet, and we'll show up there, and that'll get us started. We also have on there an email, info@trifecta-growth.com. But if you visit our website, you can get just about anything you need off that.
Love it. Rod, seriously, thank you so much. This was an awesome conversation. We're going to have you back on again. You're going to be a recurring guest. We're going to have you on every so often to talk all things training. And I know you've got some cool stories, obviously, about your time in the military and owning businesses, and we'll have to have you on to talk more about those. But seriously, again, today, thank you so much for coming on.
Hayden, I really appreciate the invitation and having me on. And you guys do a great job over Spot On Solutions. I always like working with you. Always like seeing you at the conferences as well. And until the next one, I guess we'll stay in touch.
This has been Success Elevated, making you a little bit better one show at a time. Thanks for joining us. Please subscribe on YouTube or any other major podcast platform to listen to more episodes. We are proudly brought to you by Spot On Solutions. If you'd like to learn more about how we can help you grow your business, please check us out at spotonsolutions.com.